What's up, guys? We are here in the Parker Performance Garage. We're going to undertake GT350R brakes on a 2018 GT Performance package. I think the way we'll start is kind of, if you'll just show them what we've done here, is we've outlined everything that we're going to be putting on the driver's side of the car. As you'll see in the front, you've got a bracket, a billet aluminum bracket. You've got the actual caliper itself, the rotor itself. Coming back to the back of the car, this kit comes with half shafts, new e-brake lines. Again, you've got the caliper and rotor, and then it actually comes with its own knuckle for the rear suspension. So what we're going to do here is we're going to kind of help you guys hopefully understand how to orient your install. One of the things that we've done in advance here is we had our units powder coated to match this vehicle. The owner has green stripes, so we've had it powder coated. So we want to protect that finish. These do come factory powder coated red in the kit. Even still, I would recommend that you tape them up to protect the finish as you're doing the install. One of the things that you'll want to notate is when taping is you want to leave this hole open, because that's where you're going to actually affix your bracket. And you want to leave these holes open if you do have to have it powder coated and putting the brake pads back in, because that's going to be your dowel pins that hold the brake pads in place. Also on the back, you're going to want to leave the hole open for the brakes. That's where your brake lines actually going to go in. And then the way you're going to orient these is you're going to make sure that the bleeders are in the up position. So if you were to go and put this on the passenger side, for instance, it would be trying to be installed with them in the down position so that you had the Brembo logo on the outside. That's not going to work. So what you need to do to orient your install is make sure that you have the bleeders in the up position, okay? The bracket, there's two of them, obviously, one for passenger, one for driver. There's no orientation on these. So we test fit and wanted to be able to bring you guys the solution. What you're looking for here is this knuckle. Do you see how this is flat and this has the bulge? The bulge is going to be facing the engine. So what you're going to do is you're going to use the factory hardware to install this where the current Brembo system mounts to the hardware. Then you're going to be using these as an adapter to attach to your GT350R brakes. So again, from an orientation position, when you're installing these, make sure that the bulge is facing the engine. The rotors themselves are not side specific. They are obviously front to back specific. The front rotors are a little bit larger than the rear rotors. That's pretty easy to evidence. If you look at the two of them together, the surface area is much smaller here than it is here. This is going to be your front. This will be your rear. As for the half shaft, one of the things to note on the half shaft is the thicker, larger diameter half shaft. And you'll notice they're both, when they're side by side, you'll notice that this one's much beefier. This is going to be your driver's side half shaft. They are side specific. Same with your e-brake cables. What we're looking for here on the driver's side is L's and LH's, left and left-hand side. So any of the parts that are referenced for the driver's side will say L or LH, and conversely on the passenger side they'll be R or RH. That's going to be synonymous here with our rear knuckle, which should be stamped LH. So same thing. Make sure that you're using all L's and LH's on the driver's side of the car. Same thing here with our rear Brembo. This is again bleeders facing up, and one of the important things on the rear is there is a bracket, which I apologize, I left on the table, I believe. This e-brake bracket is going to wind up on the back side of the caliper for the new GT350R e-brakes. The same thing is true here. They are not oriented side to, they don't have stamping that orients which side. So what you need to do for the driver's side, you're looking for the bolts to be facing the front of the car, because you're going to need the clearance here for the e-brake lever, and you're looking for the shield to go towards the chassis of the car, away from the wheel. So that's how you're going to orient drivers to passenger side. From there, we're going to go ahead and get started on the front. We've done a lot of the GT brake swaps on EcoBoost and on Coyote, or Cyclones rather, where we put the factory GT brakes, where we upgrade the GTs to Brembos. So the front for us is real simple. We've done it a bunch here in the shop. You're going to use two 15 millimeters on the back of the brake to release that. You're going to use a 13 millimeter on the brake line. You're going to use a 10 millimeter on the brake line bracket that holds it to the firewall. That's a pretty straightforward swap, so we'll get started on that now. We've collected our parts to get started here, our tools to get started on the front. We're going to start, we've got a 15 ratcheting wrench, a 15 open-ended wrench, and a 10 on an extension. Again, you can use a ratcheting wrench for the 10 as well. A couple of tricks: use a breaker bar or an impact gun to loosen the 15s. That would be far better. You won't struggle. If you don't have an impact bar or an impact gun or a breaker bar, obviously you'll just have to fight and muscle through it. So that's the 15s on the back that's going to hold this on. Depending on the climate conditions where you're at, your rotor may be stuck to the hub. We use Freall here in the shop. So we're going to just kind of dust the front hub here, let it penetrate and soak in a little bit, and around the edges where the metal studs are touching the rotor. This will help us. It's not going to obviously be some magic pill and do it by itself, but it certainly will help us in the removal of the rotor. As for the brake line itself, you want to remove the 13 from the bracketry before removing the bracketry from the frame rail. If you were to remove this 10 millimeter bolt from the frame rail first, you will then have no leverage to remove the 13 hard line. You're going to want a cap of some sort, because as soon as you loosen this, it's going to begin to penetrate fluid from the fittings, and because of the fluid leak, you are going to want to have a pan in place of some kind, or even just some kind of catch-all. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to get started by removing the 15s on the back of the Brembo here. Okay, lower 15 is loose. And here we go. Now the kit comes with a lot of new hardware. The one piece of hardware that you'll notice is there's some yellow Loctite on. You won't use those unless you have a convertible. There is new bolts for these 15 millimeters that are going to go into our bracket here. So our rotor, sorry Zach, I forgot a blue towel. Will you give me a blue towel please, sir?
Yes, sir.
So I've just asked Zach to go get us a blue towel. What we'll do is on the cross member here on the front, is I set a rag in place, and then that's where we will set our Brembo caliper. Okay, so something like that. And then that way it's tucked out of the way. It's not damaging the Brembo. It's not damaging the cross member, which you wouldn't really care about the cross member probably as much. And then now we can work on the 13, the 10, and removal of this wonderfully stuck rotor. One of the tricks we do here at the shop when they're stuck is use a rubber mallet and apply pressure here on the edge of the rotor. In this instance, we're replacing the rotor, so I guess in theory, if you didn't have a rotor mallet and you had to damage the rotor to get it off, you could. We don't suggest that. We don't recommend it. Try and salvage and take care of the existing rotor setup as best as you can. So we try and put the pressure here on the edge, and that broke it loose pretty well for us. So now the rotor can come off. There you go. Next, we will do our brake line here. So like I said before, we're going to start with the 13. We'll loosen that, we'll cap it, then we'll remove the 10, and we can actually pull the Brembo caliper all the way off the car. Now this vehicle is a very low mileage vehicle. It's only got 3,300 miles on it. So as you saw, just one turn, I was able to pop that loose and it's finger tight from, or finger loose from there out. Press down on your hard line while you're spinning that, and it's going to eliminate 90-ish% of any leakage. Once that's free, pull it up the shaft of the hard line, then you're going to pull that out and you're going to cap it. Okay, now that she's capped, now we can remove that 10mm from the firewall there, or the frame rail. Again, if you had to use a 10mm, just a normal wrench, you could. I'm going to use the easy ratchet because it's here and it's quick. Now you are going to have residual fluid here in the line. Again, that's why we have our pan beneath us. The kit comes with hardware for almost everything. You do reuse the 10mm that holds the bracket to the frame rail. Okay, so our Brembo is ready to come out. Most guys who are going to do this upgrade are probably going to sell that Brembo kit used or secondhand. In this event, we're going to rebox everything up for the owner of this vehicle and allow him to decide what he wants to do later. But we'll keep everything cleaned, we'll wrap it, we'll box it, and we'll label everything. With our caliper and line and rotor now removed, our brake line capped, we've got a couple of maintenance things here to do in preparation for the car to receive the upgrade. One thing you're going to want to have for this install is you're going to want to have some brake parts cleaner, and you're going to want to have some anti-seize lubricant. What we're going to do here is we're going to spray this area of the hub down with the brake parts cleaner and get it clean and wipe it down with our rag. Once we're done with that, we're going to take some anti-seize and we're going to put it on the face here and around the lip. Because as you saw, taking the factory rotor off, it's stuck, right? So the one way to avoid that is by cleaning it and putting some anti-seize on it. Okay, again, this is only a 3,300 mile car. This is a fairly new vehicle, so that cleaned up pretty quick and pretty easy. Again, based on the mileage in your car, the climate conditions of where you're at, that may differ greatly. You may have to spend quite some time. You might even have to get a wire brush in there and get some of the buildup off. This cleaned up real easy, real good. I'm happy with that, and now we're gonna add our anti-seize. Okay, I'm no Michelangelo with a paintbrush, but that'll get the job done. I'm just going to wipe the towel here around the excess of the edge of the hub. I'm going to wipe it around the edge of the front here, of the dust cover, and then I'm going to wipe anything that I got on the lug nuts off. Which I guess if you wanted to go the extra mile, you could probably tape off the lug nuts and such, but this is going to be a non-issue, big picture. We're just cleaning it up. I'm actually going to show you how to put the adapter for the caliper on before I put the rotor on, because when we put the rotor on, if you were to try and put this on, you guys couldn't see it. Again, earlier in the video when we were talking about the orientation of laying out your parts for install, one of the things I mentioned is that this bulge should be facing the engine. So there's obviously two ways that it could face the engine even still. As you'll see, there's no way for it to go on except the right way. Okay, now you could have tried to put it on this way with the bulges facing out. It will not fit. You can flip it and it will fit. However, the problem is with the bulges facing the wheel side of the car, what's going to happen is that's going to move the caliper too far and you'll actually have a clearance issue with the caliper to rotor. So what you need to do, again, as I discussed earlier in the video, is you want the bulges facing the motor, okay? And in this instance, on the driver's side, you're gonna have it just like so, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and, like I said, we have new hardware. We're gonna go ahead and get that fished in, and then we'll add the rotor to the front. So we went ahead and got the torque specifications for you, and went ahead and got the torque wrench, so that way we can kind of get ready to torque these down. The black adapter, as you saw me just loosely thread those in, that is going to get torqued to 85 foot-pounds. The caliper to the adapter, so that's going to be the bolts here that actually secure the caliper to that adapter. Those require a T60 Torx bit, and those are 136 foot-pounds. And then the brake line to the caliper itself is going to go to 35 foot-pounds. So you do receive new hardware for the brake line and new crush washers as well. So we recommend that you use both of those. So we'll go ahead and get started on torquing these down for you. Okay, so we've pre-anti-seized our hub assembly, and we are going to slide our rotor into place. Now, one of the things we like to do for ease of working with a rotor of this stature and size and weight is take a couple of the lug nuts and just run it down, kind of crisscross from one another, and that's going to give you some help in positioning and aligning the rotor into the caliper. Okay, now we're going to take our brake clean and we are going to wipe the face and the rear. Okay. Now, for the good stuff. So what we're going to start with, again, as I mentioned, is you're going to want to make sure that your bleeders are oriented in the upward position. For the brake line, as we mentioned before, that's going to get torqued to 35 foot-pounds, and you're going to use the new hardware. The orientation of the brake line needs to be such that you've got the screw hole there, and then you've got a pilot hole for the tab. So that needs to be oriented in that manner. Okay, and so to do that, as you can see, the droop, we're just going to carry that droop over and place it here on our caliper. Okay, so don't forget your crush washers. You have a brass crush washer on either side of this banjo. And we're just going to start that guy by hand. Now this is a 13 millimeter. Okay, it's snug, and we're going to set up our torque wrench and we're going to torque it. All right, so we're down to 35 foot-pounds and we are on a 13 millimeter. Again, you have both crush washers ready to rock and roll, and you're just going to go ahead and sink this in place. There she goes. Okay, so now this is ready to be put on and secured. Again, remember, your bleeders are going to go in the up position. You're going to slide your caliper over the rotor. You're going to use the provided T60s. And you're going to go line them up. We've just got these started, and one thing I noticed, and if you've taped up your brake calipers like we told you to do in the beginning of our video, is you're going to want to make sure that you peel back anything that's going to get trapped, I guess would be the word, underneath this T60 bolt. So I just removed that real quick so that way we don't have any issues with any of the tape getting stuck underneath there. Okay, so once you've got your T60 sunk in, you're going to want to modify your torque wrench setting to the 136 foot-pounds. And you're going to want to tighten those guys. Okay, now we're going to move on to the brake line. You removed the 10 millimeter factory. You're gonna put that back in. Now, one trick to get this to go in smoothly and not risk the issue of maybe stripping out your flare nut on the brake is when you're putting this in on the firewall, I want you to just put it in loosely. I don't want you to go full tight on it. I mean, you can get it, you know, pretty close to the firewall, but don't cinch it down all the way, because the reason is you want some maneuverability and be able to manipulate this end so that you can get the flared nut to line up with this fitting perfect, and then you can tighten it down. We're going to remove our cap. And as you see here, because I don't have it all the way tight, I have some maneuverability and I'm able to manipulate that fitting. And it should just go in by turning hand tight. All right, so that's good and snug. And you're gonna wanna clean up any of your brake fluid mess that you may have left. So we've cleaned up our mess. As you can see in here, everything is fitted tightly, everything is clean and neat. Your brake line should be clear. If your orientation is correct, it should be clear from hitting anything. There should be no interference whatsoever. Again, we are taped still here on the caliper. Your bleeders are facing up. All the tricks have worked. Our rotor was held in place with the lug nuts. Everything is good to go here. Now, we're essentially done with the front. We've torqued all of our bolts. We've got everything tight. The one thing that you're gonna have to do before you finish is we are gonna have to bleed the brakes. We will go through that process as the video continues, but I just want you to know that even though you're physically done with the work here, you're not yet done. All right, guys, so we finished the front, we're moving to the back, and as we were preparing and getting everything done, and how you handle your work might differ from us, but we like to regroup as we're going, so that way you don't lose tools, you don't waste time looking for tools. And in doing so, we figured we'd take a moment and stop and kind of show you all the tools that are what we are using for this job. And also we have the torque measurements and the sizes for each of the hardware that are going to go back into this rear job. So as I said before, we have made the investment for a Milwaukee Easy Ratchet. This is a 3/8 drive battery powered Easy Ratchet. If you're doing stuff at home often, this is I think a $100 investment. It'll be the best $100 you ever invest in your toolbox. We've got a torque wrench. We've got a 32 millimeter half drive. That is going to be for the half shaft. We have a T60. Now this is a specialty tool. We only had up to a T55 in our toolbox prior to doing this install. So you'll need to go to your local hardware store or parts store and pick up a T60 for your toolbox. Here we have an 11 mil open end wrench. This is going to be for the front for the bleeders. This quarter drive with the quarter drive wobble and quarter drive 6-inch extension. This is what we utilize for the brake line underneath the drive or above of the drive shaft in the trans tunnel. A various array of extensions, 3 and 6-inch for 3/8 drive, half-inch drive, 6-inch, wobble for a half-inch drive, adapters from half-inch to 3/8 and from 3/8 to half, a rubber mallet, a half drive ratchet. Also, not pictured here, I just realized it's a 3/8 ratchet, obviously for the 3/8 drive, or you just use your adapter. A trim removal tool, an 18, we recommend a ratcheting 18, an 18 socket. I skipped this, I apologize. 21 millimeter, that's gonna be used. As you can see here, we're gonna use that for the knuckle to lower control arm. That's also gonna be a 3/8 drive. So again, 18 ratcheting, 18 socket. 15 ratcheting, 15 socket. You're going to want an array of 15s, long and short, based on the clearances you have for the workspace. 13 open end, that's going to be important for doing the brake system on the front. 13 wrench, or sorry, socket is going to be needed for under the brake lines underneath the vehicle. Then you've got a 10 and an 8 ratchet and a 10 and an 8 socket. So again, with the 10, you're going to want a small, which we wound up using with the quarter drive setup here, and then a normal for the rest of the stuff. So this is, like I said, it's an involved install, right? I think you should have the majority of these tools in your toolbox if you're the DIY guy, and if not, it's just a couple bucks to probably buy those couple. Like I said, the T6 maybe and the 32 millimeter would probably be the ones that I would think you might not have in your toolbox before taking on this project. So without any further ado, we're going to jump in on the rear. And as I stated, we've got all of the sizes and torque values, and I wrote them down as foot-pounds. Can you tell my brain is in horsepower mode? It's obviously pound-feet, whatever, don't critique me. And we're gonna get started. So what we're gonna work on first is we're going to work on removing the caliper and rotor, and then we'll begin removing the actual knuckle assembly. So here we go. So what we're gonna start, guys, is this ABS sensor here. This is a wheel speed sensor. It goes down in the back. and it's an 8 mil, and we're gonna go in and start by removing that and just tucking that out of our way. Now again, I have the easy ratchet, and I've been trying to, along the video here, use just hand tools so that you could see that it is doable with hand tools, but we are pressed for time a little bit at this moment, so we're gonna go ahead and use the easy ratchet for the backs here. Now, we're gonna tuck this behind the dust cover and just tuck it out of the way. You don't wanna damage it, but you do want it out of your way so that it doesn't, okay, and now this is the 8mm bolt that came out of that sensor. You're gonna tuck that away because we are gonna reuse that on the new knuckle. You're gonna change your tool from the 8mm, grab your 10mm socket. We're gonna go ahead and break this loose. Again, same idea. This 10mm bolt we're going to set to the side here by the rotor, and we are going to use both this 10mm and the 8mm that we just removed to pre-thread those same exact spots on the new knuckle. So we've got that loose. We're going to go ahead and take our extension off. Okay, so we have the brake line fairly well loose. There was 2 10s. As you go further, you're gonna hit another 13 and then 10s underneath the car again. And what we're gonna do now is we're going to disconnect the e-brake. There are some clips here. You're just gonna depress the clip, and it, if it doesn't grab your glove, should pull right out and slide right through the groove. Once that's pulled out and slide through the groove, you literally just saw I barely even put any pressure on it. It should come right off of the e-brake hook. So now what we're going to do is we're going to tuck this out and underneath the jack stand here and get it out of our way. As we go further with the install, you'll see we're going to pull the remainder of that line. We're going to replace it with the GT350 brake line that's included in the package. And as we started to talk about earlier in the video, you want to make sure that on the driver's side of the vehicle, you have the LH equipped hardware. Next, we're going to tackle the actual caliper removal. You're going to need, we use an 18mm ratcheting wrench. If you have the easy, it might be in your best interest to use the 18 on easy. If you have an impact, you might even be able to get your impact in there. So we're going to go ahead and get that loose now. Okay, so the 18s that hold the caliper to the back of the knuckle, they are a monster. So just be prepared. I had to go and break out our persuader, and you probably could get maybe an impact in here if you have a small one. We have, like I said, the impact style easy, and it wasn't able to do enough, so I was able to break them free with this, and then I used my 18 ratcheting wrench to get them the rest of the way. And well, as you can see, it's loose and loose. So our ear 18s, and this is why, is because I mean they've got blue Loctite in them. So now I like to leave this tucked away on the exhaust system for the time being, because I usually wait till the end to do my swap for the brake line until my caliper on the new setup is already hung. And I just do that because then that way I don't have to worry about plugging the banjo bolt. It just seems to work better for my working style. 18s are removed, calipers tucked away, rotor comes right off, thankfully. And our next step is we're gonna go to these 8mm on the dust shield, and we're gonna pull that off. And there we go. Now, we're not reutilizing the dust shields, and so what I do is I bag the 3 8mm up with the dust shields, and you're going to unbox your GT350R hub, and you're going to be replacing your factory hub. So what I do is in that factory hub box, I include the brake line, and then in the factory rotor box, I include the hardware and the heat shield, dust shield. So that way, if you ever go back to stock, you have all your stuff. Dust shields removed, calipers removed, brake lines out of the way, ABS sensors out of the way. Next, our focus is going to be to loosen the knuckle from both the vertical link and the upper control arm. Oh, and actually the toe link and the half shaft. So we're going to get all that stuff going. You need 15 millimeter, 18 millimeter, 21 millimeter, and 32 millimeter to get rock and rolling on this. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to loosen the top of the vertical link. What we're going to do is we're going to be removing this lock nut on the back here. And what I do as we're removing the hardware, and I'll show you, is I use a blue Sharpie to note what hardware goes where. So we'll get started on this. Okay, so that was our goal, was to get that removed. Oh, that's a 19, that shouldn't even be yours. Then we've got the 18 on the bottom. We're just going to loosen this. And then we're going to remove that vertical link and swing the vertical link down and out of the way. We've removed the vertical link top bolt, right, and swung it out of the way. Now here's the problem, is if you are a DIYer, you don't do this every weekend, you don't know what hardware goes where, you throw this down in a stack, you don't know where it went, you don't know the orientation of the bolt heads. So what I recommend you do is you remove it. This was the top of the vertical link. It's really simple to VLT, vertical link top. Now you know that's where that goes. And I want to notate which, so this is the orientation. The bolt head is towards the front of the car. So that way I can't go and put that in like this or accidentally put it in somewhere else or reverse, right? And this is something that realistically, if you're doing in your garage over a couple of days, maybe you've slept since then, you've forgotten. So this will help keep you on track and know what bolts go where and how they're oriented. So vertical link is loose and it is spun and free around out of the way. Next, we want to work on both the upper control arm and the toe link to be removed. And then last, we would have the 21 millimeter here that holds the knuckle to the lower control arm on that side. And then we're actually going to work on removing the 21 millimeter and the 18 millimeter from the toe link here next. 18 millimeter is already on. Okay, now same thing we're going to do here. We're going to mark this. Again, this is the front of the car, and this is the toe link. Okay. Toe link can swing free. We've got the 21 millimeter for the back here. Now this is lower control arm, and this goes towards the rear of the car. Okay, so we are free from the lower control arm, we are free from the vertical link, we are free from the toe link, we are still connected at both the half shaft and the upper control arm. With the upper control arm, we simply have the bolt in place. The nut's already been removed. So now we're going to work on we need to loosen this 32, get that ready, and we're going to get this upper control arm removed. So we still have to get the upper control arm out, the nuts off. One of the things that I may have jumped forward and I don't recall, I broke this loose early on before we started removing any of that stuff. So this has already been cracked beyond the point of torque reference. And so now it'll just come out with ease. Like so. And if you would have forgotten to break that loose prior to this point in the video, the easiest thing would probably be to reassemble a couple of the links so that you have some rigidity in the hub for removal of that 32. What I would suggest is that you do it the way I did it, even if I didn't do it on camera, is do the 32 first. And then that way you don't have that issue. like so. You can leave that affixed. Now, this should come out with relative ease. Based on your location and climate, it may be something where that doesn't come out with ease. I've seen people use dead blow hammers to bang them through, retighten them and retighten that 32 millimeter and put the 32 socket on the end and use a dead blow. So it just depends on your climate. This again is a 3,300 mile car, and as you saw, it literally just popped. Right. So we've gotten our hub assembly removed. Place it up on your workbench. As you'll notice, our cheat sheet here, the knuckle to hub says 18 millimeters, 108 foot-pounds. That's actually for reapplying the new hardware from Ford Performance. The removal actually is a 15. So we're gonna go ahead and remove the 15 to get our hub assembly prepped for reinstall. We're gonna clean it up. We're gonna clean the teeth for the half shaft. We're going to pre-lube all of that, and we're going to use anti-seize. We're just gonna clean up. All right, so our hub assembly is now fresh and clean. We've gone over it with brake cleaner and dried it off with a clean rag. This side of the hub assembly is going to get the it's going to get the end of the half shaft that requires anti-seize. The side that's going into the pumpkin is actually going to get gear oil for lube. So we've already cleaned this out with a wire brush and sprayed it out with brake parts cleaner after. And now we're just going to put a little dab of anti-seize in on there. And we're going to fill her in. And then where the hub actually attaches, we're going to dab a little anti-seize on that as well. Okay, so she'll be good. I'm going to pre-lube our Ebrake assembly here. Okay, now these have already been anti-seized, pre-lubed. The orientation here is important. This bolt pattern will only go one way. However, it would go both the wrong way, upside down, and the right way. You need the e-brake cable to be going the opposite direction of the studs from the hub. So this should be coming in towards the car, whereas the studs will be going out towards the wheel, if that makes sense. And as you'll see here, the orientation of the bolts is all lined up. So we are going to anti-seize this side as well. Okay. And then our knuckle. Okay. Now that looks like I can see straight through. And this would be the 18s. And remember, we're going to set our torque wrench to 108 pound-feet, and we're actually going to tighten them in a crisscross pattern so that the load is spread. All right, so we've ran them down by hand. We've got our torque wrench set to 108. You're going to want a pry bar, probably the bigger the better, and you're going to need that for leverage to be able to torque these. And it may be, there we go. Now, we started with this one, so we're going to move and go to this one, because we're going to do a crisscross here. There we go. And last but certainly not least, And that is 108 foot-pounds all by myself. You're welcome. So we are back underneath the car. You're gonna need your crowbar. You're going to be separating, this is the C-clip side, half shaft on the driver's side. We're gonna be separating that from the housing, and we're gonna try and put some light on it here and pry. All right, so we are back underneath the car. You're gonna need your crowbar. You're going to be separating, this is the C-clip side, half shaft on the driver's side. We're gonna be separating that from the housing, and we're gonna try and put some light on it here and pry. After some mini moments of prying, the half shaft is now removed, and we have sprayed a rag with some brake clean, and you're going to work to clean this and make it all pretty again for a fresh seal for your new half shaft install. You'll find that there's a little bit of residual gear lube maybe, and probably quite a bit of sand and dirt and such. So we're just going to clean that up and get it ready to accept a new film of gear oil and our new half shaft. All right, so we have our new half shaft unbagged. The old half shaft is out and getting ready to be stored. This side is going to be the unit that's got your C-clip on it. This is going to go into your differential. You do just need to get a little gear lube on here. And then that way we're pre-lubed before we go in. All right. And then she is ready to slide in. So we pre-lubed the shaft. We cleaned the housing, and we pre-lubed the housing. Now I've set this in and I've got everything lined up. Our goal here is to get this to seat in, and you're gonna hear a this too. Okay, she is sunk. Okay, our half shaft is in. We've already assembled our hub. Our goal now is going to be to attach the hub to the half shaft, to the control arm, the upper control arm, toe link, all that stuff, and get it going. We're just gonna loosely connect everything right now. Nothing's gonna get torqued to spec, and we're just gonna get everything in place, and then we'll work to torque specs. Okay. Now remember, we marked all of these earlier, lower control arm, and then this orientation is to the rear. So that's how I know what goes where. We've ran everything down just snug with our wrenches, and now we've got our torque wrench ready to go. This one here is the lower control arm to knuckle. This is 203 foot-pounds, so you're gonna have to give this one some good heft. There we go. There we go. In the new hub, you heard us talk about earlier in the video, you're gonna use the 10 and the 8, and you're going to thread into the aluminum and kind of, I guess if you will, create the threads. So we're gonna go ahead and do that now, and then that way, when we're ready to put the brake line in, this is already done and threaded. So this top one here is just going to be where your bracket comes through and it holds the ABS sensor in place and it holds the brake line in place. And this one is a 10mm head. We're going to back her out. Clean up any of the little bird edges that may have come up. And now we're going to do the same here on our the ABS sensor that goes down in the wheel speed sensor. So now we're going to pull our wheel sensor, our speed sensor here, and we're just going to go ahead and get that guy loosely started. We're not going to worry about tightening anything yet. We're just going to loosely get this stuff together. Remember, we still got to plumb the entire brake line for the Ebrake cable. So we're going to work on that. What you're going to look at here, this is going to be our next step. This is actually going to be the Ebrake bracket. You're going to run the Ebrake line back through here. It's going to catch on to the Ebrake lever here. The orientation here is what's important to notice. And these are not labeled on orientation. They're not labeled L or R. So what you need to look at is, obviously you want to make sure that your opening for the brake, the e-brake cable, is on the top, and you need to have the gap here, okay, to clearance the lever. That's how you're gonna know which side goes to which left or right. So you have the gap here for the opening for the lever, you have clearance here, and this is also where it's gonna bolt to. So that's gonna be your orientation. So the one that has, I guess if you will, a backward 7, this is gonna be the one for the driver's side, and then you're gonna mimic that on the passenger side. And you saw the rear calipers, I'm sorry, the rear rotors came off with relative ease in comparison to the fronts. However, these do have a little bit of some rust buildup, so we've already wire brushed them and brake cleaned them, so we're just gonna go ahead and protect them. Okay, I'm pretty happy with the coverage there. Bada bing, bada boom. Okay, same like we did on the front, we are going to apply a lug nut at a catty cornered situation here. And again, these aren't putting anything like super tight against anything. They're just to keep it in place so that there's very minimal wiggle. And now we're in a position where we can hang our bracket and our caliper. First we're going to do is the caliper. Again, we had the orientation that we've already gone over. And we're just going to slide that in place. We're not tightening anything, we're not screwing anything, we're not anything yet, because we got to get the caliper in there. Now, if you remember earlier in the video, we talked about the bleeder valves. Those should both be facing up. That's how you know you're on the right side. We're going to slide this in. Your pad should clear the rotor with no issue. And then you're going to slide it in along the back here, and where we preliminarily hung the bracket and bolts, we're going to slide that into place. And then we're going to move to the bottom and do the same. We're going to use that, and we're going to get on this 15 here. Okay, and we're going to do the bottom as well. Okay, now those are both tightened. They are not torqued to spec currently, and we are going to check our clearances, and we're going to work on getting our brake lines routed now. Okay, so as we stated before, we just got that bracket and everything kind of ran down. That 15 millimeter, you're going to use a short one, and you're still going to have to finagle it in behind here with the shock and the end link to get it in there to torque these. You are going to torque these to 85 foot-pounds as well. I just got that finished and realized that we hadn't recorded that, so I apologize. Next up, we're going to go ahead and remove our 13 here on the factory caliper, and I've got my pan in place in case we have any spillage and drips, and we are going to transfer the line over to here. And in doing so, we are going to use the new hardware. We have the new bolt with the 2 new brass crush washers. So we got that 13 removed. These are going to be really hard pressed in because they've crushed into the grooves there. So you're going to want to get a little flathead here, and you're going to want to pry them out. And you'll see what I mean by that when I flip this around for you. See, now this groove matches that internal groove. So basically what we've got there is that they've made a flush mating surface. So that becomes a little difficult to peel, but I promise that you can do it. Same thing, this side actually came off already, but the same thing with this side. You'll just pop it off, put the new hardware in, which is, that is the old one. The new one is under my knee. Here we go. So here's the new guy. And we're gonna put one on either side, and they will crush down like the others were. And this is gonna get secured at 35 pound-feet. All right, so what we wound up doing is we wound up, as you saw on the other side, we ran the e-brake cable up and into the channel. You do have to obviously clip that into the balancer there, and run the 10s and the 13s into the brackets along the way. And then we did torque the bracket for the e-brake. That was 85 foot-pounds. And then you have to get the e-brake into that. There's a little bit of some muscling that needs to be done, right? You have to pull that e-brake and separate the spring from the cord so that the cord will slide in, and then that'll go right in place. So we've done all that. We've tightened our 10 mil that we had to pre-thread. We've tightened our 8 mil on the ABS sensor that we had to pre-thread. Everything has been torqued to spec. Everything is done. At this point, our next steps is to bleed the brakes, and I need to finish by doing the 32 millimeters for the half shaft. That goes to 98 pound-feet, and then an additional 45-degree turn. So we'll do that now. Okay, so we've got our 98 pound-feet. Let's get about an eighth of a turn. So that's done. Now, where both of the e-brake cables, driver and passenger side, have ran into the equalizer underneath there, there's a 10 mil that we had to manipulate for adjustment. The way you're going to adjust that is you're going to have it loosened so that you could slide your e-brake cables into place. Once you have your e-brake cables into place on the rear, you're going to go back up front. You're going to tighten that back to as close to as where you removed it previously. You're going to put the e-brake up one click. You're going to mount your wheel, and then you're going to rotate the wheel until the wheel is taunt. It's not going to be so tight that you can't move it, but you're going to feel some pressure. Once that's good, then you're going to go ahead and tighten up your set screw there, the 10 millimeter, and then you'll be good to go for your e-brake setting. We've already done all of that, and we actually have the e-brake fully engaged currently, and as you saw, that was how I was able to torque the 32 millimeter half shaft. Not as that we were able to have it all tight. So it's all done. I think all in all, the install, had we not been filming and just been working straight through, probably would have taken somewhere in the 4 to 6 hour range, something like that. Maybe 6 to 8 hours if you were, going at it alone. I think it went, relatively easy. All of the stuff is easy to follow along. The parts are all factory, so everything fit phenomenal. All the hardware is included, so there was no issues there where we had to run to the parts store and buy something. And as I said earlier in our video, the orientating of what goes on what side, take that time in the advance of doing your install so that you know driver side, passenger side, and you kind of have a good idea of what you're dealing with as you're going. That helped us out a ton. Knowing the torque specs, obviously we've given that to you here in the video. That should help you a ton. From here, we're just going to bleed the brakes. Now, one of the things for bleeding the brakes is these each have a bleeder on the inside and the outside of each caliper. And you're going to start with the passenger's side rear. You want to work from the furthest away from the master cylinder. We're going to start on the passenger's side. And what you're actually going to do is, like I said, you're going to start from the furthest away from the master cylinder. So on the passenger side, you'll actually start on the outer, then you'll go to the inner. And then once you're done with both of those, you'll come over here to this side. You're going to work from the inner to the outer. And then we're going to go to the passenger side front, and we'll do the the outer and then the inner. And then we'll finish on the driver's side, and we'll do the outer and then finish with the inner. So that's going to be what we do next. And then we will be putting the car on the ground and going to test drive it to make sure everything's okay.